Well, we begin in Sudan, where fighting between the army and the rapid support forces is raging for a 10th day. Thousands of people are fleeing the violence and more than 400 have been killed. Many neighbourhoods have also been left without access to food or clean water. And the country is experiencing a near total internet blackout. Rahila Mohammed begins our coverage.
People in Khartoum are living in the middle of a war zone. What was once a bustling market is now piles of rubble. Buildings and homes are in ruins.
This bullet was fired here near my house here in Khartoum, Bahri. We are suffering of lack of food, lack of electricity, lack of water. We do not have electricity for 3 days now, and also we do not have access to water.
People say relatives are missing, but they can't go out and search for them as they're too scared to leave the house. Doctors have described the situation as catastrophic.
The hospital is still operational, but not to the full capacity due to the shortage of medical equipment, let alone difficulties the medical staff face to get to work.
The fighting in the capital is centered around the presidential palace and the army headquarters. This video appears to show members of the paramilitary rapid support forces with their commander, General Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, in the area. But it's not clear when it was filmed. Across the Nile River in the city of Omdurman, some people are burying their dead. This home was hit by shelling while the family was asleep.
I have burns on my body and I couldn't stand up, but God helped me. Many shells came into my room and I collected them. They hit the room and came through the window. They broke the glass. I was lying in bed, and when I stood up, I fell to the ground.
In Dardouk, north of Khartoum, there are pockets of resistance. Some people took to the streets in protest on Saturday, calling for an end to the violence. Analysts say Sudan's long-awaited transition to civilian rule, a prospect that seemed imminent a few weeks ago, is moving further out of reach. For as long as General Daglo and Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan refuse to back down.
One of them needs to win so that he could claim power. This is how they see it from both ends. And ultimately, they have no problem, in my opinion, sacrificing whatever it takes, like compromising or jeopardizing the security of the whole country.
And all the while, Sudanese live in fear as more of their country is destroyed in a battle for power. Rahila Mohammed, Al Jazeera.
Well, after a week of battles that delayed rescues, many countries are scrambling to evacuate their citizens and diplomats. 4 Jordanian planes landed at Amman military airport, as you see there, carrying more than 300 people from Port Sudan. Spain, Germany and France also pulled out hundreds of their citizens on Sunday, and more countries have announced evacuation plans in the coming days. Our correspondent Hiba Morgan has more from Khartoum.
Well, there are 2 kinds of evacuations happening here in the capital, Khartoum. There's the evacuation of foreign nationals with the help from their embassies and allied countries here in the capital, many of them making their way to the eastern city of Port Sudan, just like the UN mission here in the country. And Port Sudan is a city that's about 800 kilometers away from the capital. So that's a trip on a normal day that would take about 11 to 12 hours. But because there would be checkpoints on the road and because it's a large convoy, it's likely to take longer than that. And those are the foreign nationals evacuating. Then there's the locals, the residents of Khartoum themselves, who are doing their own evacuations, mapping out their own routes outside the capital to make it to safe places. Places like Jazeera in the central part of the country, or River Nile in the northern part of the country. There are also some Sudanese who are trying to evacuate the country completely, not just to neighboring states. They're trying to move to neighboring countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, or Chad and South Sudan. They're simply looking for ways, depending on where they are, depending on the fighting at the time that they're trying to move, to make it out of the capital, whether that be to a neighboring state or neighboring country in the end. Let's not forget that this is the first time Khartoum is actually witnessing a displacement. Khartoum is not a city that has witnessed conflict, despite the fact that Sudan has had numerous wars going on within its borders, but never in Khartoum. So people are very unused to this situation.
Well, Noon Abdelbasit escaped Sudan for Egypt on Saturday, and she describes what it was like fleeing the violence there with her family.
Getting out of Sudan was not an easy decision to make. It was not an easy journey. What I would recommend to my sisters and brothers that are trying to flee Sudan right now is you need to be brave. Please take care of each other. Don't carry too much money or too many clothes. Pack lightly. Make sure you have plenty of food and plenty of drinking water. The journey is really, really long. And when you think about it, just go for it. Don't think of the what ifs. Just please try to get out and be safe. Getting out of Khartoum was definitely the most difficult part of this entire journey. Having to go through these checkpoints where you don't know whether you're going to be robbed or killed, or just holding my mother's hands, looking into my grandma's eyes, just all holding each other's hands and praying that it all goes smoothly. I would say that even though it was the shortest part of the trip, it was definitely the most nerve-wracking. The situation has just gotten so much worse in the last few days. People have completely run out of food, clean drinking water. The hospitals are almost at zero capacity. They're completely not working. There's no petrol. People can't move around. Even evacuations, like when we evacuated, it was way much easier. It was smooth. Even at the border, there weren't that many people, but now these borders are filled with so many people, and it is turning into a full-blown humanitarian crisis that needs to be stopped. A ceasefire needs to be put into place, and the people of Sudan need to be evacuated safely.
You just heard Nun talk about a humanitarian crisis in Sudan. While the fighting is exacerbating an already difficult humanitarian situation there. The UN Humanitarian Office says about 15.8 million people, roughly a third of the population, will need assistance this year. There are 3.7 million internally displaced people, too, who need help. Around 4 million children under 5 and pregnant women are acutely malnourished and need life-saving services. And as many as 11.7 million people simply don't have enough food to eat. Well, Kate Minor-Vorley is CARE's East and Central Africa Regional Director. She says the violence is worsening the crisis.
One of the things that we are always conscious about as CARE is that women and girls and children are always the most disproportionately affected by violence. And so some of the realities with these journeys as they flee is the risk to sexual and gender-based violence for women and girls. And so recognizing that reality, we are deeply concerned about what this ongoing conflict means for women and girls and how it impacts them. We also know that Sudan in itself, from an economic point of view, when you think about what is the implication of this war on the social, what is the social impact of this crisis? This current violence deepens an already existing humanitarian crisis in a country that was already struggling economically with rising food prices, devastating floods, disease outbreaks. And our experience has shown that those who were already highly vulnerable had very few coping mechanisms. And so right now, with this conflict, with the few coping mechanisms that they had, they are left with none. This is the reality for those who are staying in Khartoum, for those who face the conflict in the environs, and for those who are now trekking to the border.